Thank you all for being here and for your interest in our today's presentation. In the next 20 minutes, Lena and I will give you an overview of 25 German data sets that are available for personality research. Lena was formerly a postdoctoral student at my department here at GESIS, and we worked together on several research projects using this kind of data, so using large-scale survey data and answering different personality-related questions. And in this course, we identified several data sets that allow interesting research. And we noticed that many of them are not very well known in the scientific community. And this gave us the idea to make them more visible, to provide you with the relevant information on this data. Today, Lena is at Michigan State, and I'm happy that she joins us here and gives this overview together with me. So when we talk about personality data, we usually refer to the big 5 dimensions of personality. So extraversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, and openness. They describe relatively stable patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And the Big 5 has gained a wide acceptance as a framework to describe personality at the most global level. This acceptance and this agreement within personality psychology a couple of decades ago made the Big 5 more and more visible, also in fields outside personality research. And so these disciplines became more and more interested in this construct. Disciplines like sociology, economics, public health, just to name a few of them. And so these disciplines included measures of the Big 5 into their studies and especially also into international and national survey programs. So nowadays, personality in terms of the Big 5 are assessed in most large-scale social surveys, and the data of these surveys are available for research purposes. Why should you use this data instead of your self-collected data? Well, the one thing is, of course, that you do not have to invest in assessing own data because the other data is already available. But besides that, there are, I think, 2 major pros of large-scale data compared to self-assessed data. One is the comprehensive set of constructs. Large-scale data or survey data usually include a very large and diverse set of constructs assessed. And the Big 5 are only a minor part of these. So, of course, socio-demographic variables are included, but also opinion data, attitudes, or behavioral data is usually included in these surveys. The other advance, and I think this is the most crucial one, is the quality of the data. These surveys are not only large in size, so that they include several thousand respondents usually, but they are of high quality. They usually rely on population representative samples so that you can infer on distributions in the general population. They are also conducted professionally. So not only the samples are of high quality, but also in general the resulting data. Because these survey methodologists that execute, that manage the data assessment really know what they are doing, how to field a survey as good as possible, and all the quality aspects are documented. So you can look up how the response rate, the non-response bias, etc., is of these surveys. Another pro is that these surveys are usually part of larger survey programs. These are either conducted in a panel design, so following the same respondent up over time, or in repeated cross sections, so that you have can investigate changes in time over years or decades. And this allows longitudinal analysis and causal inferences. And as I mentioned earlier, all of these surveys are conducted to be available, to be reused. So you can easily access them to analyze them and publish the data. However, most of them, as I mentioned also earlier, are not widely known, and this gave us the idea to develop an overview of available and reusable data sets, including measures of personality. And as there are so many of them, we needed to restrict our selection to specific study criteria. On the one hand, we only included surveys that focus on the adult population. So we did not include studies on adolescents or children's samples. We also only included studies that were conducted in Germany and in the German language. From a methodological point of view, we only included high-quality samples, thus based on probability samples representing the target population. Also, we set a minimum size of the samples, so they should be of substantial size with a minimum of 1,500 respondents. From the side of the measurement, our demand was that all Big Five domains should be assessed, so not only one or two of them, and that these should be assessed with validated instruments of known quality. So no self-developed questions of unknown quality.
So what search strategy did we use to find those available and reusable data sets that included measures of the Big Five that Beatrice has just mentioned? First, we, of course, included surveys that we know they fulfilled these criteria and had included the personality measures because we had already worked with them extensively. For instance, because they were hosted by GESIS. Then in a second step, we conducted a systematic research using the databases of major German research data centers. So here you see the research data centers that we searched. And this was, for instance, the research data center of the socioeconomic panel or of the DZHW, so of the German Center for Higher Education, Research and Science Studies. In a third step, we then also screened well-known international survey programs that, of course, were also run in Germany for personality measures. And here, for example, the World Value Survey was one study that fulfilled this third step. And lastly, we then contacted the experts that are affiliated with those identified surveys, not only for them to review our description of their surveys, but also to identify additional sources that we had potentially overlooked thus far. And in total, the search strategy yielded 25 data sets. And for many of those data sets here, you can see the logos of the respective survey programs. So just to name a few, we identified the data sets that were collected within the ALBUS, within the ZERP, the socioeconomic panel, the twin life studies, the national health studies, SHARE, or the German longitudinal election studies, and so forth. And then for each of these 25 data sets, we systematically extracted a range of descriptive information. And that information related both to general aspects of the survey program, but also more specifically to the measurement of the Big Five. So that then researchers can easily extract this information or retrieve this information to generate their own research questions. And what we now want to do in the next few minutes is, instead of presenting this descriptive information for all of the 25 data sets one by one, we present you this information that we had extracted at a more aggregate level and point toward exemplary research questions that can arise from this information about the survey characteristics that we have collected.
The most crucial thing, of course, is the target population. As we said in the beginning, most of the surveys targeted the general adult population. Some of them target specific adult subpopulations in Germany, for example, the elderly in share or employed in or unemployed in pass or higher educated, or for example, twins in twin life. The sample design for this adult population was, as I said, per our selection, only random selected samples, so representing this full adult population or this full subpopulation. To give you an example of research that can be conducted by these heterogeneous samples is the following. What we did a couple of years ago is that we investigated the psychometric properties of at that time, just newly developed Big Five questionnaire. And we compared the psychometric properties across different educational groups, and we found that in lower educated groups, the measurement quality was much weaker and not leading to the ideal factor structure compared to higher educated groups. So educated groups that are similarly educated to the typically Psych 100 students drawn in personality research. And we identified that the lower educated have a higher tendency for acquiescent responding, and when we controlled for acquiescent responding, this five-factor structure that was intended came up in an ideal pattern. So the full blurredness was due to this tendency for acquiescent responding.
We also broadly describe the research design for each of the 25 data sets. And here, the large majority of those data sets were actually part of longitudinal panel surveys where the same respondents were tracked over multiple years. There were only a few cross-sectional surveys, whereby some of them actually were repeated cross-sections such that a different sample from the same population, though, was drawn at different times. Even though most studies were longitudinal panels, this does not necessarily imply that they also included multiple longitudinal measures for the Big Five across time. So in addition to the information to the general research design of each dataset, we also extracted whether there were actually repeated measures for the Big Five. And indeed, there are a range of the surveys of the panels that have assessed the Big Five at multiple times. So what we put here as example, the pair from the GESIS panel, the ZERP, and the NAP studies. And a research opportunity that arises from such longitudinal repeated Big Five measures is, of course, to investigate the longer-term changes that occur or do not occur in personality within person across time. And for example, here in this project that we put as an example on the slide, we took advantage of the GESIS panel where personality was assessed every year to then explore the question how often persons actually change relatively quickly in their personality traits. So here from one year to the next in the general population. And if such short-term changes actually remain at a longer-term level. And what we found is that those short-term changes from one year to the next were actually relatively common, often also rather large in size, but most typically more temporary in the sense that most of the short-term change reverted after a while in the longer term.
As mentioned earlier, all studies include a huge set of different variables. In our documentation, we describe the thematic foci of the studies next to the socio-demographic variables that are included in all these surveys. Most of them have clear thematic foci. And this allows to investigate subgroup comparisons. It allows to do correlational analysis with these content variables and the big five. Compared to these surveys having thematic foci, we have the GESIS panel in our selection. The GESIS panel is an omnibus panel with diverse topics, and it also allows that researchers submit their own proposals for constructs, for questionnaires to be assessed as part of the GESIS panel. So that this offers the opportunity that your construct of interest, your questionnaire of interest can be combined then with a whole set of variables that are already assessed in former waves. During the pandemic, some of the studies added a COVID-related module, so assessing COVID-related behavior and attitudes. And we used this data in the GESIS panel to investigate what effects personality has on, and personality assessed previous to the outbreak of the pandemic on COVID-related behavioral change.
Okay, and then of course we also systematically extracted information about the Big Five assessment. And first, in terms of the Big Five measures that were used. And the large majority of the 25 data sets that we describe in that paper use different variants of the Big Five inventory. Most surveys actually use the BFI-10, so the ultra short version of the Big Five inventory that measures each Big Five domain with 2 items, so 10 in total. But there were also other variants present, for instance, the BFI-S, the BFI-K, or the BFI-2S in the GESIS panel ones. Most programs or surveys decided on a single measure of personality that potentially then was assessed multiple times. But there were also 2 surveys or programs that included multiple measures of the Big Five in their program. So for example, here in the GESIS panel, there was both the repeatedly assessed Big Five, BFI-10 assessment included, but also at a single time, the longer version, the BFI-2S. So this, for instance, then allows researchers to triangulate their research questions using different measures. And as an exemplary research question or potential that results from this information about the Big Five measures in those 25 data sets, here we took advantage of the effect that so many study programs actually focused at the same target population and using the same measure, in this case, the BFI-10. And we examined how consistent the measurement properties of the BFI-10 are across the different samples. And with a few exceptions, we found that in general, these measurement properties are quite consistent.
Most of the surveys are all surveys are self-reports. So the target persons in the surveys report on their own personality. Most surveys are individual surveys, so that only one target person is included, but some of them include more target persons. So for example, the full household, as in the GSUP, or specific relatives, like in pair from the spouse, or in twin life, the twin, etc. And so in these surveys, you have self-reports of target persons that are in a specific relation to each other. And this allows to combine these or compare the personality profiles of these relatives. We did this a couple of years ago using the GSUP data and investigated how similar personality profiles in romantic partnerships are. And we compared the personality self-reports of the spouses and found that they are particularly similar for agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness. and that similarities in these 3 dimensions also predict the duration of the marriage. Coming back to the data that is available in very few of the surveys, there are other reports available. So reports on the personality of a third person, for example, on the own child in pair farm.
Okay, we also described information about the assessment mode of the Big Five. And here, most surveys use personal interviews or self-administered questionnaires. There were also some programs that actually included multiple assessment modes. And sometimes this was actually based on participants' preferences. So sometimes people could indicate if they wanted to respond via paper pencil questionnaire or rather via an online questionnaire. There were also some programs that included changes in the assessment mode over time, mostly changing from personal or telephone-based interviews to web-based online questionnaires. And a research example that results from this information about the assessment mode and potential mode switches is, for instance, if such a mode switch actually affects participants' responses. And here our colleague and co-host of this Meet the Expert series has examined if such a switch from offline to online responding systematically affects the responses, and found that this was not systematically the case.
We also report if the surveys are nationally focused or international comparative. Few of our survey programs that he identified are part of international survey programs, namely the World Value Survey, the International Social Survey Program, and also PIAC. And these international studies, of course, allow cross-national comparisons. We are currently doing this based on the PIAC data, where we investigate the relation between personality and cognitive ability. We investigate the degree of shared variance of personality and cognitive ability. And we found that in Austria and Germany, for example, there is a comparatively high shared variance of about 10%, while in Sweden, these 2 constructs are more or less independent. So we see that there is a huge variation in the shared variance across country. We also report if additional data is available, and in most cases, there is additional data on the survey administration per se. So for example, data on the date of the assessment, on the duration, on the location of the assessment. In case of interviews, if there are other persons present or information about the interviewer, so the gender, age, or even the educational degree of the interviewer. And you can use this information per se, but also you can infer regional information based, for example, on the location, and then link geodata with the self-report data. And this is done for several studies that there is existing geodata linked to it. Based on this geodata, you can infer information on the pollution, the wealth, or the general political orientation of the region the person is living in. We used this geodata in one study where we inferred the weather on the day of the survey assessment. And we found that persons report to be much less open on days that are extremely rainy compared to usual days.
Okay, so by now you should have an idea about the type of information that we provided for each of the 25 data sets, and some of the many research questions that of course result from this information. And one way we tried to structure this information in the publication was by including 2 large tables. The first is the one that you can see here already. And that first table provides some overarching descriptive information for each of the survey programs. So here, exemplarily highlighted for the GESIS panel, you see, of course, first the name of the program or the data set, and then the substantive focus of the study is included, and some information about how to access the data. In the second table on the next slide, thank you, we then try to zoom in a bit more into the study design and the information about the Big Five assessment. And here again, highlighted for the GESIS panel, for example, you see the information that we mentioned earlier, that the Big Five were assessed using both the BFI 10 and the BFI 2. This should be the fourth entry for the GESIS panel. And for example, that the BFI 10 was assessed at a yearly rate. This is somewhere in the middle of that row for the GESIS panel. So in general, with those tables, you as a researcher should be able to relatively quickly get an overview about the most important study characteristics for each of those 25 data sets.
So to conclude, I hope we could show you that there are many and reusable data sets that are full of potential research questions for personality research. And we hope that we inspired you to use these data sets in your own studies and conduct some of these very interesting research ideas. As we said earlier, we had to restrict the overview of the different studies in several ways. It is only focused on adults, and it is only focused on surveys conducted in Germany. So it would be great if other researchers could do similar overviews for other target populations, especially for student populations, and also perhaps for other countries. Our overview is also restricted in that way that it was published at one point in time, namely about 2 years ago. Already now there are even more data sets available. So if you are aware of additional data sets that meet our criteria, please comment on our OSF site so that we can include these, that we can check these data sets and can include them in an update later on. Thank you very much for your interest.